All right, we are recording. Hi, my name is Ariel, and this is
Chadnicholas.
Chad. He wrote the book Nightmare, which I don't know if that's backwards or not, but this is a beautiful book. First of all, I don't remember who you said did this cover for you.
Miblart, they're a cover artist company.
Yeah, they did a fantastic job. I'm just going to show it off for just a second. So this is the front cover. It has the crow, which is one of the main, I want to call it a villain, maybe-ish, in the book. And
They're kind of the villains.
it does have a crack on it. And if I'm not mistaken, just from reading the book, this is like the cracked windshield, no?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
And the cracked mirror later.
And then the back has this really scary scarecrow. FYI, I'm actually scared of scarecrows. They work on me. But the cool thing about this book is that when you take the jacket off, it's like a negative. It is awesome. Okay, I'm not even one of those people that is obsessed with covers and things, but like this is one of the more beautiful books that I own. So before we get into talking about the book, I will say that you can get this on Amazon. And Chad, can you get it anywhere else?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble online and quite a few of the in-store Barnes & Nobles in Texas. And then it's also I found a few on eBay. And then I think any other of the major online retailers have it.
I actually went to my Barnes & Noble after I saw you posted it on Instagram, and I looked and they didn't have it, and I was sad because I wanted to take a picture with it and be like, look, I found you.
Yeah.
So I was a little sad about that. But I'm going to leave his Instagram and his YouTube channel and any other contact information he wants to give me in the description below. So I want to ask you real quick, did you know what a group of crows is called?
A murder.
Did you know that before?
Yes.
Okay.
I
Because
happen to have seen that somewhere. I did do some extra research on crows beforehand, but I did know that for a while. I can't remember where I saw it, but
I saw it on TikTok like 3 days ago, and I was like, whoa. So
yeah, it works.
that made me smile. So do you want to give a brief synopsis of the book, or would you like me to do it?
I mean,
You
it's
wrote
up to
it.
you.
You can do it.
Yeah, so I guess the main story follows Scott as he things from his past come back to haunt him, and then crows also start coming back, and he just has to figure out how to deal with the things from his past without letting it affect his future. I
Ooh.
guess it's really hard to give a synopsis for it. It was hard to write the
I was
synopsis.
gonna say that was a little bit harder than me trying to explain you did it better than me trying to explain it without. I spoiled some of it for a friend of mine who is going to be reading it, and she's actually started reading it, and she was just like, oh crap, you told me about this part. I'm like, I'm so sorry, it's hard to explain. So
Yeah.
before you watch any further, we are going to be having a very spoilery discussion about the book. I have some questions for Chad. If you would like something that's a little bit less spoilery, I will link Ali from BookBench's video. They also talk, and that's actually why I read the book, was Allie's video. I saw it and I was like, all right, I'll read it. Because David from David's Book Reviews had already done a review on it, and I had seen it, and I thought about wanting to read it, and then, when you think about a book and then it just leaves your mind, but then you see it again, you're like, all right, I'm gonna buy it. I actually bought it. I bought it while I was still watching the video. So
That's cool.
I was hooked. So my first question for you is, the very beginning of the book, when he's having the dream, and it feels so real. Like, I was hooked from literally the first 2 pages. My plan was to read 2 chapters, and go to bed. That did not happen. So was that something you wrote first, or was that something you wrote later on?
I wrote it first because the first chapter went through several different variations. Originally, it was just a nightmare, but then when I started doing more drafting and more things, I realized I wanted I guess since this is full spoilers, I wanted the first chapter to appear like it was a dream. but the first chapter is actually what happened at the end of the flashbacks.
Yeah.
And the first chapter is actually Vincent, not Scott, which is why it doesn't give a specific name. So I wrote that first because I knew it would match the tone of where I wanted to go later in the book. And I think writing it first, I think helped because like before that, still wasn't really sure if I could actually write the whole thing. When I wrote it, I felt like I was comfortable enough with how the first prologue turned out that I went ahead and wrote the rest of it.
Okay. See, I honestly thought maybe you wrote it after you wrote chapters 2 through 5. That's what I was thinking when I was reading the book, but it's really cool to know that because I thought it was Vincent, but I didn't want to say that in my little review I wrote about it. That's really cool, dude. Like, that's really cool. I actually do have a question about Vincent. Now, you said before in Allie's video, which again I will link down below, that you didn't really go into it thinking that you were going to write the description of his illness as it being like textbook. You kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Um,
Exaggerated.
There you go. Exaggerated the illness. Now, did you go into that trying to over exaggerate Vincent himself, or because I realized that Scott came first, but Vincent is obviously the more dominant of the two.
Yeah, I approached it because I did the whole thing to get to the ending. I always really wanted to do again, since this is full of spoilers, I always want to do a twist ending where, because I've always loved the twist where it was all a dream and it was all in the character's head.
Me too.
But the one plot twist that everyone kind of makes fun of because it never works, so most people hate it. And I always thought it was a really cool concept if you could add stakes to it and make the dream matter. But it being a dream means you can do more things, especially with horror. So I knew I wanted the split personality and it to be a battle between two. That way the dream at the end can have stakes. And that's not something that would ever actually happen with the real life illness. And so I had to exaggerate that portion of it. Vincent himself, I didn't really wrote him to be an exaggeration. And in my head, Vincent was always basically a serial killer who really tried his very best not to be and was deep down a good person, but because of the circumstances with which he was born, I guess,
Yeah.
he really struggles with it. So, and everyone also can tell that he struggles with it. So, I wrote Vincent from that perspective. So, he is a slight exaggeration of a character, but he was always a real person to me.
Did you feel like him and Scott were on the same level of like main character, or did you have one that you felt was more of the main character?
Scott, I consider Scott the main character of the entire book, but Vincent is it's kind of a dual. I kind of approached it from a dual protagonist. Scott's the one that the story follows, but Vincent is the one making more decisive decisions. And by the end of the book, it's kind of a duel between the two. And I knew by the end of the book, because I always hate it when like the villain or something has a really good plan, but then they don't get to win just because they didn't get to win.
Yeah.
I knew from the beginning Vincent should win because Vincent's approach and Vincent's intelligence would get him the victory. So I knew that I needed Vincent to win, and I also knew I didn't want the audience to hate it when he did.
Yeah.
So I tried to make it in a sense where Scott's the main character, so you really feel connected to him, and he's also did some bad things, specifically to Vincent.
Yeah.
But then you understand where he's coming from because certain things with his daughter and things. But then Vincent's also done bad things, but you can understand where he's coming from. So neither one's completely right or wrong. They're both just reacting to situations that they themselves didn't create. So at the end, I saw it as just Scott got the 7 years, and then because of that, Vincent got the rest.
Right. Sorry if you heard that. So that actually brings me to my next question. Do you think that more people are going to see Scott as the villain versus Vincent, because when I read it, after finding out what Scott did to Vincent, basically essentially killing Vincent, I was like, that mother bleeper. Can't say that on YouTube, but I was mad. Like I literally, I don't read with the dust jacket on. So I had the book and I had it open and I literally closed it and dropped it and I was like, I got up. I was like, that little motherfucker. So like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, there are definitely moments when writing it where I also didn't like Scott because Vincent was always my favorite character for some reason, even from just the outlining. There's just something about Vincent that I really liked, I guess just because I feel like he had to work to earn things and to earn not to be viewed as a terrible person more.
Yeah, for real.
So like, yeah, when Scott did that, that was pretty bad. And then the whole argument scene at the end when they're in the bathroom and Vincent's killing Karen in the dream.
Yeah.
That whole argument scene, some of the things Scott said, honestly irritated me, which
Yeah.
is weird because I was the one writing it, but I was still just like, this is like when Scott's like, you couldn't save our daughter. But that's just a terrible thing to say. He's not particularly wrong in that scenario, but I
Yeah.
could see both sides. I feel like Vincent was always kind of the hero to me, just because he's the one that I always knew would win, and I felt like deserved it more. Whereas I don't consider Scott a complete villain, but by the end of it, Scott Scott's made enough mistakes and made enough bad choices that I can definitely see people considering him the villain instead. Which it's cool that some people consider Scott the villain and some Vincent, because I kind of wanted it to be where neither one is completely wrong or right.
I definitely saw Scott as the villain. So I felt for Scott because of what happened to him as a child. And then as he started realizing he wasn't alone, like the not alone, uh, I was like, oh my God, this kid's probably like gonna freak out. But he actually had a little bit more composure than I think I probably would have. But, you know, they both went through a lot. Like, think about what happened to Scott, how Vincent was born. Now, when you were playing around with that idea, was the bird cage always going to be a permanent fixture?
It was actually funny. Mentioned in the other video I did with Ollie, or Allie. Is it
Allie.
Allie?
Allie.
Okay, I
Yeah.
keep saying Ollie for some reason. I said it in one of the YouTube videos I did, but the video I did with Allie, uh, in the first draft, there wasn't that whole backstory wasn't there, and I ended up adding it in later. But which the first draft really, I shouldn't have started writing it because I didn't have near enough done. But even in the second draft, I had it being a cage, but the first two flashback chapters, I wrote it as a dog cage,
Oh,
just
okay.
because something he was in. And then I was just sitting there, and it dawned on me. I'm like, I have crows being everything in this book. Why is this not a bird cage? So
Yeah.
then I went back and found every spot that I wrote, because like that was something that I should have thought of originally instead of a dog cage, but it just hadn't dawned on me. So the second I thought about it, I went back and I changed all the places where it was dog cage to bird cage, and all the places where it was dog food to bird seed. And then I made it where the person who kidnapped him was hurting birds,
Mm-hmm.
and then that kind of tried to do a parallel between the birds who got hurt by him and then Vincent. So yeah, the cage was always a permanent fixture, but for some reason it wasn't until halfway through that draft when I realized it should be a bird cage instead of a dog cage. And then that worked for at the end,
Oh
something to hang
yeah.
from a tree.
Oh yeah. That we're kind of fast forwarding a little bit. We're going back and forth from places, but when Scott's walking through the graveyard and he sees his daughter in a bird cage with a lock that's not going to open, I was like, where is this book going to go? Because I had a thought. FYI, your twist at the end was amazing. I did not see it coming, and I cried. No lie. I'm a big crier, but like totally cried. But when he's walking through that and he sees that cage, I could almost feel his heart fall into his stomach. And for me to be a reader reading something that is not only from a debut author that I had never heard I have never heard of before, and it was unlike any other book that I had ever read, was just really special for me. because if I'm going to pick up a book by someone that's never written a book before, I tend to do research on them to see if I can find any like short stories they have done or something like that. And I didn't do that with you. I just kind of took David and Allie's word for it, and I was like, I'm in. And I'm glad I was. So I found your writing to, like Allie said, get better over time. The first 2 chapters, I could sort of tell you were a new to writing. I'm not a writer. I wouldn't know what I was doing. So FYI. But it felt like, because like Allie said, your writing got better. But not only did your writing get better, you got way more ruthless as the book went on. Like, it was dark. It was heavy. It was almost like you weren't afraid to make someone uncomfortable. And I really, 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 I love horror. And I really, really appreciate it. I was not only uncomfortable, I was scared. Like the first 200 pages, I was like, oh, like I don't do that when I read books. It's very seldom that I do that. So my question from that is, were you ever afraid and felt like you needed to hold back? Was there things you wanted to put into the book that you were like, maybe that's too dark?
Not really. I've always had an issue with one. I love horror too, but one thing I've always noticed is a lot of horror movies revolve around families, and a lot of the horrors revolved around children. And and it's always done because you're more afraid when a child's put in danger. Like the list goes: man, woman, child, dog. If a dog's in danger, you're the most concerned. Which is why a lot of it revolves around children. But very few horror movies and horror books will actually kill the children.
Yeah,
Like
that's
it
so true.
does, but a lot of the other ones, the whole time they're in danger, but in the back of your head, you're always like, they're not actually going to do it, so not that afraid. And I think that, and the fact that I knew the twist was going to be at the end, I I built the whole thing around the twist, and because of that, I knew I wanted the last scene to be Scott, April, and Vincent. So I knew I had to kill the rest of the family by that point. The one that was the hardest, I really debated about Joey, the baby,
Yeah.
because that's just, I wanted Joey in there because that's something Vincent wouldn't know. So in the dream scenario, Joey's not there until Scott makes a big deal about where's the baby, and then Vincent puts it together, and that's a foreshadowing of it being a dream. But I knew I had
didn't
to kill
get
it.
that. Look at you teaching me stuff.
Uh, yeah, I did a lot of stuff with the whole dream twist where there's a lot of things that was different, like April's hair's a ponytail instead of long because that's how Vincent remembered it, and other stuff like that. Yeah, but I knew I'd have to kill the kid, and I was thinking that was the one death that I was like, I have to be particular about how I do this because I felt like it was crossing a line. So I eventually decided have it happen off screen or off the page, and then the way it's done with the burial and stuff is in a sense worse. But because it wasn't actually seen, I was like, you just see the pile in the aftermath. And that way I could keep having Karen say he won't stop crying to set up at that point when she says he won't stop crying. So the fact that I was able to kind of foreshadow it too, and earlier Scott uses the shovel to dig the dog's grave. So if I can ever use something to set something up, I really like it. So at that point, I was committed to the
That's really
burial
cool.
death.
Well, see, I would see now that makes more sense. So I thought, because you know how he was always looking around for pictures of Joey and they were just disappearing. I'm thinking like, did Vincent go back and remove the photos or change the photos to like mess with him? But now I'm thinking, were they just not there because Vincent didn't remember him? Because in my head, I was thinking Vincent didn't have anything to do with Joey. He was born within that 7-year stretch. Well, we'll say like 6.5 year, because I don't remember how old he was, a couple months old. But like, he's not Vincent's child. He didn't feel like attached to him, so he was like, screw the baby. Like, that's kind of how I thought about it.
Yeah, it could definitely be viewed like that. I'm in it as there was nothing. That's another really reasons why I felt more awkward writing the first couple of chapters, because chapter one had to establish everything about what Scott's life was. So that way, when it transitions to a dream in chapter 2, all the differences, you can tell what the differences are because the original's been set up. So yeah, all the pictures being gone was just because Vincent wouldn't know what the pictures looked like. So no picture was on the wall that he didn't remember.
Right. Okay. So what about the dog?
That was another thing. In chapter 1, it's set up that the dog ran away, but then in chapter 2, the dog, or 3, I guess, the dog's suddenly back, and then they only mention why the dog's back after Scott questions it, because again, Vincent wouldn't know that the dog ran away or supposedly died, so he'd assume it's still alive. So Scott mentions that it's weird that there's a dog there, and then the rest of them hesitate for a second and then explain like, oh yeah, he came back today, and then that way it's further setting up that something is wrong. They keep hesitating and explaining things.
See, that
I wanted to
makes
set
more
up the
sense.
dream as much as possible because it is a really strange twist.
Yeah.
And I thought if I could add stakes and then really, really foreshadow it, I might be able to do it in a way that made people like it instead of getting upset that it was all a dream.
See, when I was reading it, I saw those little like hesitations, and I figured that maybe they just thought Scott might be going crazy. And then I was like, maybe it's because it's a dream. And then at the end, I was like, there's no fucking way that whole thing was a dream. Like, that upset me in my soul. But you did such a good job with it. Like, I love that sort of story where it's all a dream at the end. And the fact that you did it so expertly was amazing. Like, you did such a good job. I can't wait till you release another book. Like you said, it's coming October?
Yeah, it's with my editor right now. I'm waiting for her to send it back to me. But yeah, I'm planning for an October release date. I'm hoping to have a cover I can show off with it a month or two.
That would be cool. I like that idea. So we already went over the dog. Okay, so another thing I wanted to mention was at the beginning when the kids are going to school and they are going out to the bus stop, but they kind of had to run, and like there's a gun, you hear about the gun, and he's looking through the window and he's all tense. At first I was thinking, is this like an alternate universe where crows like kill people for fun and sport? And then I think back to April being the only one with like locks on her doors and bars on her windows. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? So when you kind of knew that April and Vincent were going to have a lot in common, was that the thing you wanted Scott and April to have in common, was the kidnapping?
Um, yes, the kid. I wanted there to be a reason that Scott and Vincent eventually, all the like memories was dragged back up in a way that made Scott blame Vincent for something. And I thought having it be a kidnapping would make Scott, he'd understand how April's feeling, and because Scott wasn't there, he would blame Vincent for it. So
Yeah.
it'd give him a reason to hate Vincent, and it'd be a reason that set up why, because it was because she was put in a cage like he was, or
Mm-hmm.
April wasn't put in a cage, I guess, but kidnapped.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was because of that similarity that made Scott react differently and made him get more upset than he otherwise would have. So I wanted to use that to kind of explain why the rift between Vincent and Scott happened in the first place.
So when Scott is Scott and Vincent kind of pushes forward and goes off and takes care of April's abductors, and then he wakes up, well, not wakes up, but he becomes Scott again, and he's like covered in blood and everything. Was that always meant to be that moment, that defining moment, like I've got to get rid of him right now?
Yeah, yeah, I had the idea because I wanted it to be something dramatic. Be that way it because again, Scott and Vincent really managed to make it work throughout their life. So I wanted to have it be a like imagery based scene. And let me turn my phone on silent. Want it to be an imagery based scene. That way it was like something the readers could visualize. And I thought the scene of Scott waking up and being covered in blood and having no idea what happened, and yet like still knowing what happened, I thought that was a cool visual And it, again, in the dream sequence, the blood comes out from the bathtub.
Yeah.
So I could use it to connect to that. So because of the fact I could use it to, again, foreshadow the dream, and it was a dramatic shock to Scott, I thought that was the best way to go to make it believable that Scott would suddenly hate and think he should get rid of Vincent.
Okay. I like that. Now, when it comes to the crows, I know you said that you originally had the crow sitting on the tombstone. Again, check out Allie's video. You said that you're like, oh, I could use these. At what point were you? At what point did you sort of make them Scott's phobia? Like, when did you decide? What, like, when in the writing process was that decided?
Well, I guess it was when I decided to add the flashbacks, because the thing was, the first draft of the story didn't have the flashbacks, and one of the main reasons why it was not good at all was because the emotional moments, especially the last one with Scott and Vincent, didn't work because you didn't have a sense of who Vincent was. And throughout the main story, because it's entirely from Scott's perspective, there was no opportunity to introduce Vincent in a way that wasn't purely antagonistic. So I wanted to add the flashbacks to explain how they both got in that situation, and then therapy sessions with Vincent to flesh him out as a character. And I knew if I was doing that, I'd need to show the inciting incident and what made them the personality split. And at that point, I'd already realized that the crows worked really well in the prologue. And I was like, well, that's going to be the dream that Vincent wakes up in anyway. I can use them to symbolize what happened. So then I was like, well, if you was attacked by crows day in and day out, that'd be pretty terrifying. So that's when I worked them into the flashbacks. And then I realized, well, if Scott's scared of them in the flashbacks, and I say that the crows are what he dreams about, and throughout the book, I tried to say multiple times that Scott's always had nightmares that involved crows. So I put crows in the main story as much as I could to try to set up that this was also a nightmare, because crows are always present when he's having a nightmare.
Nightmares, yeah.
And that way the crows would never affect Vincent, because the crows were never what Vincent was afraid of. So to Scott, they're terrifying and they look like monsters, but to Vincent, they're just birds.
Yeah. The birds that he can use to unlock.
Yeah, because in the
lock.
flashback, he used the birds to unlock the cage and kill the dude, and then later he uses the birds to kind of get revenge on Scott. So,
is it wrong that I kind of wanted to see him kill his abductor? Like,
oh no, I wanted it to. That was a fun scene to write.
yeah, like I was waiting for it. I was like, oh, this is gonna be good. So those of you who haven't actually had the physical book in hand, like I said, this is, well, hold on. So it's got jacket, book, but whenever you open it up, there's a lot of really pretty art on the chapter pages, chapter headers. So this is like a regular, not a regular chapter, but not a flashback chapter. And then the flashback chapters, which I don't know if this was something, I know you said that you wanted something similar, but I don't know if you came up with the art yourself. Yes, no?
I didn't draw the art. I did tell them what kind of art I wanted. I was like, maybe big trees with crows on it for the normal chapters, and then for the flashbacks, just do crow feathers. And then the artwork they did was incredible.
This is the flashback. So every time, honestly, every time I saw this, I got really excited, because their past was something I look forward to learning more about. And I absolutely adored this book. I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. I know some people don't care about star ratings. Star ratings are hard to give, and I get it. But I gave this book 5 stars. This is actually on my list of favorite horror novels. And I'm not just saying that to bait you. Totally is. Totally on my list of favorite horror novels now. And when I was reading it, because there was a kid in a very compromising position, I was trying to think of all the horror movies and horror books I've read that have to do with families and young children. And this was, we've already touched on this, but it's something I wrote down. You weren't afraid to kill the children. And I thought that was great, So I want to talk about the children for just a second. So there are 4 children. Did you base them off of anybody you knew, or did you just think about April and all of the rest of them on their own?
Their personalities and characters themselves wasn't really based on anyone I knew. It was just I knew April would take after more Vince. April took after Vincent a little more, so I kind of based her personality on what I saw Vincent as, but a much toned down version of him. I kind of treated Tommy like a younger version of Scott, and then May was pretty young, so and she didn't have a lot of dialogue heavy scenes, so she just was kind of a younger kid, and then Joey was a baby, so
Yeah.
it's really hard to write a character like a baby that has no dialogue, because when everyone's having a conversation, I just have to I can't forget that he's there, even though he's not talking. But as far as the interactions, I did base, like when they're all around the dinner table and April and Tommy are poking fun at each other, I kind of based those conversations off what me and my 2 older brothers, because we'd go back and forth and give each other a hard time and stuff. So I based the sibling relationship off of that, but not the characters themselves, but some of the interactions and how they would tease each other and stuff. I kind of took a little inspiration of that from actual sibling relationships.
Yeah. Okay. I just kind of figured that if you made them up, then you're a better writer than you probably think you are. So, May, her death. How was that for you?
So in the original, even when I was writing this draft, at the beginning, I'd originally planned for her to die at the house. So when Tommy was controlled by Vincent in the dream and stabbed May, I was originally going to kill her right then and there. But then I realized I had this really cool hospital environment that I wrote in chapter 2, and I was kind of sad that I wouldn't get to use it again. And I was like, well, I can probably, and I felt like her dying at the house and then Tommy hanging himself at the house, they both felt too repetitive.
Yeah.
And I realized that one other thing I'd noticed in horror movies, aside from them not killing the children, but this is really in most movies, if a character's injured, but then they get to the hospital, they always survive. No main character gets shot, taken to the hospital, and then the doctor's like, oh, they didn't make it. If you can get them to a hospital, it's safe. So I was like, well, I'll let May appear like she's going to die and then be taken to a hospital. That way, hopefully, readers will expect it to happen like it always does, where, oh,
Yeah.
she's at a hospital now, she's saved. And then she dies at the hospital in a much more violent way than it would have been had it not been there. So that's actually the one scene in the entire book that I actually had a nightmare about.
Oh, really?
The day after I thought of how May was going to die at the hospital, that night I dreamed about someone dying on a hospital on a table like that with the blood. And then I woke up, I was like, okay, that scene's creepy enough, I have to add it now.
So after I read that part, I was a little crushed because as soon as she died, I already knew, I kind of thought all the kids were going to die at that point because I'm like, well, he killed one, he's going to kill them all. Um, but when I read that, I was crushed because she was by far besides the baby, but again, the baby doesn't have any dialogue and you just know he's there, was literally the most purest thing inside the whole book. And I was like, how dare you kill her? But it made sense for her to die. Now, her death, Scott thought that Vincent had maybe taken over his mind or something and like did something, but then the door was locked and he couldn't get in. Now, when you wrote that, did you mean that as a machine malfunction, or did something else happen, or was, because it's never really explained on how it happens?
Well, that was one thing. This is one of the perks of it all being a dream. Things like that, Vincent just did it.
Uh-huh.
Because none of it, because like that's another thing. Hospital glass would break the first time he hits it with a chair. It's not realistic for him to hit a hospital glass with enough to crack it, but it not shatter. But because it's a dream, Vincent can do whatever he wants. So scenes like that, I was just like, well, Vincent can make the machine malfunction or however he does it to make that scene happen. And then things like the hospital glass breaking, all the doctors not being helpful at all, things like that, Vincent could control. So the dream was really hard to write because there are so many things I couldn't do. but it gave me a lot of freedom in the horror elements, which I really liked.
Yes, I really liked it too. I want to talk a little bit about the ending. Uh, the ending where, again, if you've made it this far, you know it's spoilers. But at the end, when Scott stabs himself in the heart, honestly, I felt like he should have died faster in real life. But then again, not real. But when Vincent stays with him because he doesn't want him to be alone, that's when I started to cry. We'll be honest, that's when it started. But was that something that you had planned ahead of time, or was that something you felt when you got to that point that was necessary to have to kind of show that that Vincent's really a good person, he's just kind of a psycho killer?
Yeah, I debated throughout the outline what their final conversation should go, and you're completely right. Scott should have died way quicker from a knife to the heart, but again, one of the perks of the dream. But yeah, I debated what their last interaction would be, and I knew that Vincent didn't hate Scott, but Vincent was very upset, like had a right to be angry and
Yeah,
vengeful about it.
of course.
So throughout it, I debated whether it should be a nice ending between the two or whether Vincent should just not speak to him at all. And then I got to a point, it was specifically when, because I had debated having it be the nice moment, but I wasn't sure. When Scott had the moment after Karen died and Scott was apologizing and saying, "This is all my fault," then I realized for Scott's character journey to complete, he'd have to apologize to Vincent and admit this was his fault. He did it. We can stop here. So then when I realized I was going to incorporate the apology scene into the cemetery scene that was the ending, I realized that if Scott was going to apologize, Vincent would forgive him, even though it wouldn't be enough for Vincent to not kill him because Vincent had to kill him to get back to his family.
Yeah.
But Vincent would forgive him and they'd end on good terms. And I really thought the good terms ending worked a lot better. So because then earlier Vincent did have to die alone, and then that's where the whole theme of not alone came from. So I really wanted at the end of it, Scott didn't die alone because Vincent was with him, and then Vincent's not alone anymore because he got
Yeah,
to go back to
full
Karen.
circle. Yeah.
So I thought it worked out on both levels.
See, I think it worked great. I know some people would have been like, no, just death, 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 but I think it worked out great. And I also, for me, because I felt like Vincent really did feel like Scott was like his brother, but then you find out that Scott really didn't feel that way. And I was like, how could you not feel that way? Like, you legit share a body. Like, you can't be
Yeah.
any closer than that. So I don't know. I thought the twist at the end was great. I thought the book wrapped up really well. I really didn't have any more questions up until he woke up, and of course Karen, she could always tell them apart. She knew, but she didn't question it. She was just like, "All right, this is good. We're good now." And then book ends. So, was that something that you originally planned for her not to question it, or?
Yeah, I always knew the ending chapter. I knew the main chapter of the book that I was planning for. I had the idea for the cemetery scene, was the first idea for a scene I had for the book, and then I kind of wrote it backwards. But I knew the final chapter was always going to be between Vincent and Karen. And I always knew Karen was going to know that it was Vincent. I debated I debated how long to go. I thought about having a full conversation between the two. And in the earliest draft they had a whole conversation about where to go from there. And then when I reread it, it really didn't work. So I liked ending it with just Karen knew and Vincent knew that she knew, and then leave it to the audience or the readers to think exactly where they would go from there.
Yeah,
Because it's a really weird conversation. Hey, I
it would.
just killed my
Yeah.
personality. I'm back now. So I was like, leave it. Karen's okay with it. And you can tell from the way she reacts, she is. So I knew by the end of it, I knew I wanted it to end that way, where it's kind of an open ending with how they specifically react to it, but you kind of know it's going to end happily.
From the flashbacks from like Karen's dates with Scott versus Vincent, I feel like she married them more because of Vincent and less because of Scott. I feel like she kind of got with Scott because she liked him, but then fell more in love with Vincent. And then not necessarily put up with Scott, but like kind of put up with Scott because he came attached, literally. So I don't know if that's how you intended it to be, but that's how I saw it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that different people can see it in different ways. I kind of saw it as completely equal between the two, and she only really started having an issue with Scott when he had an issue with Vincent. But it could really go, it's one of those things that I think you can really see in different ways. And so long as it works for whoever's reading it, it's okay.
All right. Well, do you have any questions for me or anything else you want to say? Because those are literally all the questions I had.
Oh, I guess, yeah, I have a YouTube channel if anyone wants to check it out. And like I mentioned earlier, I will have a second book coming out this October. So, yeah, I guess that's all I had to say.
And I'm going to link all his information down in the description so that way you can check him out. He does post videos about other books he reads, and he's pretty active on his Instagram. So if you're one of those people that like I only follow if they're active, he's active. So
Oh, and thanks so much for inviting me on here.
oh,
I
no
almost
problem.
forgot.
I have been trying.
Thanks so much.
I've been wanting to talk to you, like have this discussion with you since I finished the book. And I finished this book, I think I finished it like 10 something at night or something like that. And I was actually going to send you a message. And I was like, no, that would be weird. We don't know each other. But now it's fine.
Yep.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, please go and like and subscribe to Chad and like the video. Leave comments if you have any questions. I'm sure Chad will come back and check the comments. And have a good day. Bye. Say bye, Chad.
Bye.